The letter was only a few pages long, but somehow it was heavy enough to make Elvis Presley stop everything. There were thousands of letters waiting for him. Letters from fans, letters from strangers, letters from people begging for photographs, autographs, favors, meetings. Elvis had learned to live with the endless stream of paper. Most letters arrived. Most letters disappeared. Most were forgotten. But this one never should have reached him. And yet somehow it did. It came in an ordinary envelope. No expensive paper. No dramatic message on the front. Just a child's handwriting. Uneven. Careful. Almost fragile. The name was written across it. Elvis Presley. Elvis picked it up. He almost put it aside. Then something made him open it. And within seconds, the room changed. Because this wasn't really a fan letter. It was a goodbye disguised as a request. The boy who wrote it was lying in a hospital bed. He was young enough to still believe in impossible things, but old enough to understand that something was wrong. The hospital had become his world. White walls, cold floors, the soft footsteps of nurses outside his door, the sound of medical equipment beside his bed, the smell of antiseptic, and the long nights. Those were the worst. When everyone else slept, the boy would stare into the darkness. Sometimes he was afraid. Sometimes he tried to be brave. And sometimes he simply needed something familiar. That's when he listened to Elvis. There was an old picture of Elvis beside his bed. The boy had looked at it so many times that he knew every detail. To millions of people, Elvis Presley was a superstar. To the boy, he was something much simpler. A voice, a comfort, a reminder that somewhere beyond those hospital walls, there was still a world filled with music. So one day, the boy decided to write to him. He knew it was probably impossible. He knew Elvis received countless letters. He knew his own letter might never even be read. But he wrote anyway. His hand trembled around the pen. He wrote one sentence. Stopped. Rested. Then continued. Sometimes he had to wipe his eyes before he could see the paper clearly. His parents tried to help. He refused. He wanted to write it himself. Because if Elvis ever read it, the words had to come from him. Finally, after struggling through the last lines, he reached the end. He stared at the paper, then wrote the sentence that would change everything. Elvis, if you ever have the time, please come see me. He folded the letter, put it inside the envelope, and gave it to his parents. That was all. No expectation, no demand, no promise, just a child's final hope. Days passed. Nothing happened. The boy didn't receive a phone call. No package arrived. No message came. No Elvis. Eventually, the boy stopped asking. His mother noticed. One evening she asked, "Are you still hoping he'll come?" The boy looked at the photograph beside his bed, then smiled weakly. He's Elvis. His mother waited. He probably has too many people asking him for things. The boy looked back at the ceiling. I understand. Those words broke his mother's heart. Because the boy wasn't angry. He wasn't complaining. He had simply decided that his dream was too big. And that was when the story should have ended. Except it hadn't. Because somewhere far away, Elvis Presley was holding that very letter in his hands. Elvis had been surrounded by people that day. Managers, friends, staff, People discussing schedules. People talking about upcoming appearances. People asking questions. The usual noise of Elvis's world. Then someone placed the envelope among the others. Elvis picked it up. He looked at the handwriting. Something about it caught his attention. He opened it. Read the first line. Then the second. Then the third. His expression slowly changed. Someone nearby noticed. "You okay?" Elvis didn't respond. He kept reading. The room continued moving around him. But Elvis had stopped listening. He reached the middle of the letter. His eyes slowed. Then he read the same sentence again. The boy wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a signed photograph. He wasn't asking Elvis to make him famous. He wasn't even asking for a miracle. He wanted to meet him. Just once. For a few minutes. Elvis lowered the paper. His jaw tightened. He stared at the table. Then picked up the letter again. He read it from the beginning. This time, every word hit differently. When he reached the final sentence, he stopped. The room went silent. Elvis looked up. "Where is he?" Nobody understood. "Who?" Elvis held up the letter. "This boy." A person nearby stepped closer. "You mean the kid who wrote that?" Elvis nodded. "Where is he?" Someone explained that the boy was in a hospital. Elvis listened. His face became more serious with every word. Then came the warnings. It wasn't simple. The visit could cause attention. Security would be complicated. The schedule was packed. There were people expecting Elvis elsewhere. Someone reminded him that he couldn't simply disappear whenever a letter touched his heart. Elvis listened to all of it. He didn't argue. He didn't become angry. He simply waited. Then he asked, "How far away is the hospital?" The room fell silent. Someone looked at him. "You really want to go?" Elvis looked down at the letter. Then quietly answered, "He asked me." Those 3 words changed the entire room. Because everyone understood what Elvis meant. He wasn't going because someone had invited a celebrity. He wasn't going because there was a camera waiting. He wasn't going because it would make a good story. He was going because a child had asked him. Elvis stood. The meeting was over. Someone tried to remind him about the evening's plans. Elvis didn't even look back. Cancel them. But cancel them. And then he walked away. The same man who could command an arena with one movement of his hand was now leaving everything behind for a child he'd never met. Meanwhile, the boy was having another difficult night. His mother sat beside the bed. The lights were low. The photograph of Elvis was still sitting nearby. The boy reached toward it. "Mom." "Yes." "Do you think he ever got my letter?" His mother paused. She didn't want to lie. "I don't know." The boy nodded. Then he whispered, "That's okay." He closed his eyes. A few minutes later, his mother thought he was asleep. But the boy wasn't. He was staring at the ceiling. And in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, "I just wanted to say thank you." His mother froze. "Thank you for what?" The boy looked at Elvis's photograph. "For making me feel less scared." His mother turned away. She couldn't let him see her crying. Then, something happened outside. At first, it was just a sound. A car. Then another. Footsteps. Voices. A nurse looked through the hallway. Someone whispered something. Another nurse turned. Then another. The hospital staff began looking toward the entrance. Nobody knew exactly what was happening until someone said the name. Quietly, almost disbelievingly. Elvis. The word moved down the corridor. One person told another. Then another. Within minutes, the hospital knew. Elvis Presley had arrived. But Elvis wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He wasn't performing. He walked through the entrance with his head slightly lowered. No stage. No spotlight. No screaming crowd. Just a hallway. And one destination. The boys' room. As Elvis approached the room, he slowed down. He looked at the number on the door. Then at the letter in his hand. For the first time that night, the man who had performed in front of thousands looked nervous. He took a breath. He had met presidents. He had stood before enormous crowds. He had faced cameras his entire adult life. But this felt different. Because this time, there was nothing he could perform. Nothing he could sing that would make everything disappear. He could only show up. And sometimes, showing up is the hardest thing a person can do. Elvis reached for the door. His hand stopped for half a second. Then he turned the handle. Inside, the boy was lying quietly. His mother was beside him. Neither of them knew what was about to happen. The door opened. The boy slowly turned his head. At first, he saw only a silhouette. Then the figure stepped into the light. The boy's eyes widened. His mouth opened. But no words came out. Elvis took off his sunglasses, looked directly at him, and smiled. "Hey, little man." The boy stared. He looked at his mother, then back at Elvis. His voice finally came, almost as a whisper. "You're real." Elvis smiled. "Last time I checked." The boy laughed. It was a tiny laugh. But his mother hadn't heard that sound from him in a long time. Elvis walked toward the bed. He pulled a chair closer and sat down. For the first time that night, nobody cared that he was Elvis Presley. He was just a man sitting beside a frightened child. The boy looked at the letter in Elvis's hand. "You read it?" Elvis nodded. "Every word." The boy lowered his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come." Elvis leaned forward. "Well," he gently placed the letter beside the bed. "You asked." The boy looked at him, and suddenly his eyes filled with tears. Elvis reached out his hand. The boy took it. Neither of them spoke. For several seconds, the room was completely silent. Then Elvis asked, "So tell me something." The boy looked up. "What? What song of mine do you like the most?" The boy smiled. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he forgot he was in a hospital. He began talking. Elvis listened. Really listened. And the longer they talked, the more the room changed. The machines were still there. The hospital walls were still there. The illness hadn't disappeared. But for a few precious minutes, the boy wasn't thinking about any of it. He was just a kid, sitting beside his hero. Elvis eventually looked at the clock. He knew he couldn't stay forever. But when he stood, the boy suddenly tightened his grip on Elvis's hand. "Wait." Elvis stopped. The boy looked up at him. There was something in his eyes. Something Elvis hadn't seen before. Hope. Real hope. The boy swallowed, then asked the question that would change the rest of the night. "If I get better, will you come back?" Elvis didn't answer. Not immediately. He simply looked at the boy. because he understood what that question really meant. The boy wasn't asking about another visit. He was asking if there would be a tomorrow. And Elvis suddenly realized this wasn't just a story about a famous singer visiting a sick child. This was about a child who desperately needed a reason to believe there would be another day. Elvis slowly sat back down. He took the boy's hand again. And what he said next would stay with that child long after the hospital room became empty. But before Elvis could finish, the boy made one final request. A request so simple that nobody in the room was prepared for it. And Elvis's reaction would leave even the boy's parents speechless. The boy was still holding Elvis's hand. His fingers were small, weak, but he refused to let go. Elvis looked at him and waited. "What's the request?" The boy hesitated. He looked toward his mother, then back at Elvis. His voice was barely audible. "Could you stay a little longer?" Elvis didn't answer immediately, because he knew what those words really meant. The boy wasn't asking for another song. He wasn't asking for an autograph. He wasn't asking for a photograph. He was asking for more time. Just a few more minutes with the person whose voice had helped him through the nights when he was afraid to sleep. Elvis looked at the clock, then at the boy, and quietly said, "Sure." He pulled the chair closer. "Tonight, you tell me what you want to talk about." The boy smiled, and suddenly the hospital room felt different. For the next few minutes, they talked about everything except the illness. The boy told Elvis about his favorite movies. He told him about the songs he listened to. He talked about the things he wanted to do someday. He wanted to see the ocean. He wanted to ride in a fast car. He wanted to visit a place where there were no hospital walls. And almost shyly, he admitted, "I want to see you perform." Elvis smiled. "You've never seen me live." The boy shook his head. "I've only seen you on television." Elvis leaned back. "Well, then you've got something to look forward to." The boy smiled. His mother looked away, because she knew what Elvis didn't yet know. The boy had stopped talking about the future. He hadn't mentioned it in weeks. Now he was making plans again. Small plans. Childish plans. But plans. And that alone felt like a miracle. Elvis noticed the change too. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he could see it in the boy's face. The fear had softened. The boy was smiling more. His eyes were brighter. So Elvis decided to make him laugh. He began telling a ridiculous story about something that had happened backstage. The boy laughed. Then Elvis exaggerated it. The boy laughed harder. Soon even his mother was laughing. For a few minutes, the hospital room sounded almost like a normal family room. No machines. No fear. No whispered conversations in the hallway. Just laughter. And Elvis loved that sound, because he understood something. Sometimes you can't change someone's situation, but you can change what they feel while they're inside it. Eventually, the boy reached toward the small table beside his bed. There was a photograph there, an old photograph of Elvis. The boy picked it up. "I've had this for a long time." Elvis looked at it. "You really like this picture?" The boy nodded. "I look at it when I'm scared." Elvis became quiet. He took the photograph carefully, looked at it, then looked back at the boy. "You shouldn't have to be scared all the time." The boy shrugged. "Sometimes I am." Elvis leaned forward. "Then when you're scared." He pointed toward himself in the photograph. "Look at this guy." The boy smiled. "Why?" Because he looks pretty confident. The boy laughed. You. Elvis laughed too. Exactly. The boy held the photograph against his chest. Then he asked, "Are you ever scared?" Elvis stopped. It was such a simple question, but it caught him off guard. He looked at the boy, then slowly nodded. Yeah. The boy looked surprised. You. Elvis smiled faintly. Everybody. Even Elvis Presley. Elvis looked down. Especially Elvis Presley. The boy stared at him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a superstar. He was looking at a human being. The conversation became quieter. The boy asked Elvis why he kept performing. Elvis thought about it, then answered, "Because when I'm on stage, people forget their problems." The boy nodded. "That's what your songs do for me." Elvis looked at him. "What do they do?" "They make me forget where I am." That sentence stayed in the room. Elvis didn't know what to say, so he simply reached over and squeezed the boy's hand. A doctor entered quietly. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood near the door, watching. He had seen many famous people visit hospitals. Most visits were short. A photograph, a handshake, a few words. Then they left. But this was different. Elvis wasn't rushing. He wasn't looking at his watch every few seconds. He wasn't asking how long the visit had taken. He was simply there. The doctor finally said softly, "Mr. Presley, thank you for coming." Elvis nodded. "Thank you for letting me." The doctor smiled, then left them alone. Time continued moving. Eventually, Elvis's security team appeared near the doorway. They didn't say anything, but Elvis understood. It was time. He stood. The boy's smile disappeared. "You have to go." Elvis nodded. "I do." The boy looked down. "Okay." But his voice sounded different now. Elvis noticed. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Something pulled him back. He turned around. The boy was staring at the floor. Elvis walked back. He sat down again. "Hey." The boy looked up. "What?" "I'm not leaving yet." The boy smiled. Elvis leaned closer. "You know what I want you to do." The boy shook his head. "Fight." The boy looked confused. "Fight what?" "Everything." Elvis pointed toward him. "Every bad day. Every scary night. Every time you feel like giving up." The boy listened. "You fight." The boy nodded slowly. Elvis smiled. "And when you get stronger." He paused. "You send me another letter." The boy's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" The boy smiled. "Then what do I write?" Elvis laughed. "Write anything." The boy thought for a moment. "Maybe I'll write, 'I told you I'd get better.'" Elvis smiled. "That's the letter I want." The boy's mother had been watching from the corner. She wiped away a tear. Elvis noticed. He looked at her. "He's tougher than he thinks." She nodded. "I know." Then Elvis turned back toward the boy. "Your job is to get stronger." The boy nodded. "And yours?" Elvis smiled. "Mine. Your job is to come back." Elvis paused. The boy was waiting. Elvis looked into his eyes, then said, "I'll do my best." It wasn't a dramatic promise. It wasn't a guarantee. It was simply honest, and somehow that made it more powerful. Before leaving, Elvis asked if he could have something. The boy looked confused. What? Your letter? The boy looked at him. You already have it. Elvis shook his head. I mean the original. The boy's mother reached for it, but Elvis stopped her. Actually, he looked at the boy. Keep it. The boy smiled. You want me to keep it? Yeah. Why? Elvis leaned back. Because someday, when you're older, I want you to look at it. The boy waited. And remember that you were strong enough to write it. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He nodded. Elvis stood one final time. This time, he really was leaving. He walked to the door. The boy watched him, then suddenly called out, Elvis. Elvis turned. Yeah. The boy hesitated, then asked, Can you sing something? Elvis smiled. Right now. The boy nodded. Elvis looked toward the mother. She covered her mouth, already crying. Elvis returned to the chair. He sat beside the bed. And quietly, without a microphone, without music, without an audience, he began to sing. The boy closed his eyes. For those few minutes, the hospital disappeared. The machines became background noise. The walls disappeared. The fear disappeared. There was only the sound of Elvis's voice. And the little boy listening. When the song ended, nobody spoke. The boy slowly opened his eyes. That was for me. Elvis smiled. Yeah. The boy whispered. Thank you. Elvis stood. This time he walked toward the door. He reached for the handle, then stopped. He looked back. The boy was still watching him. Elvis pointed at him. Remember. The boy nodded. Fight. I will. Elvis smiled. Good. The door opened. Elvis stepped into the hallway. And just before the door closed, the boy called his name one more time. Elvis. Elvis turned. The boy smiled. I think I'm going to get better. Elvis stared at him. For a second, he couldn't speak. Then he nodded. I think so too. The door slowly closed. But Elvis didn't know what was happening behind it. The boy's mother sat beside the bed. The boy was still smiling. For the first time in a long time, he was talking about tomorrow. What he wanted to eat. Where he wanted to go. What song he wanted to hear. What he would write in his next letter. His mother listened. And quietly cried. Because something had changed. Not in the machines. Not in the hospital. Not in the diagnosis. Something had changed inside her son. Hope had returned. Elvis walked down the hospital corridor. His security team followed. Nobody spoke. He looked back once. The door was still there. Room number. White walls. A small child behind it. Elvis reached into his jacket. He pulled out the boy's letter. He stared at it, then folded it carefully, and placed it against his chest. One of his friends asked, Are you okay? Elvis didn't answer for several seconds, then quietly said, Yeah. But his eyes told a different story. Because somewhere deep inside, Elvis knew this visit wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning, the hospital received a phone call. The person on the other end asked for the boy's room. A nurse answered. Who's calling? There was a pause. Then a familiar voice said, It's Elvis. The nurse froze. And what Elvis asked next was something nobody in that hospital expected. because he wasn't calling to ask whether the boy had received his gift. He wasn't calling for publicity. He wasn't calling to hear thank you. He had one question that could change what happened next. How is my friend doing? And when the nurse gave him the answer, Elvis made a decision that would take this story somewhere no one had expected. Because the letter had brought Elvis to the hospital once. But what happened next would bring the hospital into Elvis's world. The next morning, the hospital phone rang. It was early. The corridors were still quiet. Nurses were beginning their shifts. Doctors were checking their patients. And in one small room, the boy was awake. He was holding the photograph of Elvis in his hands. He had barely slept. Not because he was afraid, but because something had changed. For the first time in a long time, he was thinking about tomorrow. Then the phone rang again. A nurse answered. "Good morning, this is the hospital." A voice came through the line. Calm. Familiar. "Hi, this is Elvis." The nurse froze. For a moment, she thought someone was joking. Then she recognized the voice. "Mr. Presley." "Yes." There was a pause. Then Elvis asked the question that mattered. "How's my friend doing?" The nurse looked toward the boy's room. She smiled. "He's awake." Elvis exhaled. "Good." Then came the question nobody expected. "Can I talk to him?" The nurse walked into the room. The boy was sitting up. She approached the bed. "You have a phone call." The boy looked confused. "Who?" The nurse smiled. "Someone you know." She handed him the phone. The boy lifted it slowly. "Hello." For a second there was silence. Then he heard, "Hey, little man." The boy's eyes immediately widened. He looked at his mother. His mouth opened. "Elvis." "That's right." The boy smiled so hard that tears appeared in his eyes. "You called me." Elvis laughed softly. "I told you I'd be checking on you." The boy held the phone with both hands. His mother turned away. She couldn't stop herself from crying. Because yesterday, her son had been talking about tomorrow. And now, tomorrow had called him. They talked for several minutes. The boy told Elvis he had slept better. He told him he wanted to get stronger. He told him he had already decided what his next letter would say. Elvis laughed. "You work fast." The boy smiled. "I told you." "Told me what?" "I'm going to get better." Elvis became quiet. Then he said, "That's what I wanted to hear." The boy looked at his mother. Then asked, "Are you coming back?" There was a pause. Elvis answered, "I don't know when." The boy's face fell slightly. Then Elvis continued, "But I'm not forgetting you." The boy smiled again. "Okay," Elvis said. "Promise me something." "What?" "When things get hard." Elvis paused. "Remember last night?" The boy nodded. "I will. And remember what I told you." "Fight." "That's right." The boy smiled. "I'll fight." Weeks passed. The boy's condition changed slowly. There were good days. There were bad days. There were moments when the family felt hopeful, and moments when fear returned. But something was different now. The boy had stopped asking, "How much time do I have?" Instead, he began asking, "When can I go home?" It was a small change. But to his mother, it was enormous. The photograph of Elvis remained beside the bed. The letter remained carefully folded in a drawer. And every time the boy became frightened, He remembered the night Elvis sat beside him. Not the famous Elvis, not the man from television, the man who had looked him in the eyes and said, "Fight." Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. The doctor entered the room. The boy looked at him. "Is something wrong?" The doctor smiled. "No." The boy waited. The doctor continued. "Something's going right." His mother stood immediately. "What do you mean?" The doctor explained that the boy was responding better than they had expected. There was still a long road ahead. There were still challenges. But there was progress. Real progress. The mother covered her face. The boy looked toward the photograph and whispered, "Elvis." That night the boy asked his mother for paper. She brought him some. He carefully picked up a pen. His hands were still weak. But this time, he didn't struggle because he was afraid. He was writing because he had something to tell someone. He began, "Dear Elvis," then stopped. He smiled and continued, "I told you I would get stronger." Months later, the hospital room looked different. The boy looked different. He was stronger. He could sit up longer. He could laugh without becoming exhausted. And one morning, he was told something he had dreamed about for months. He was going home. His mother cried. The boy laughed. He hugged her, then immediately asked, "Can I take Elvis's picture?" She smiled. "Of course." He carefully placed the photograph into his bag. Then he reached for the letter. He kept it too, because those two pieces of paper meant more to him than anyone could understand. One was the letter he had written when he believed his dream might never come true. The other was the letter he was now sending as a boy who had started believing in tomorrow. But the story still wasn't over, because Elvis received that second letter. He opened it quietly. Read the first line. Then smiled. The boy had written, "Dear Elvis, I kept my promise." Elvis stopped reading. He looked down, then continued. The boy told him about getting stronger, about leaving the hospital, about wanting to see the ocean. And then near the end he wrote, "Thank you for coming when you didn't have to." Elvis read that sentence twice. Then he turned the page. The final words were simple. "I hope someday I can do for someone else what you did for me." Elvis lowered the letter. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he smiled, because he finally understood something. The boy hadn't needed Elvis to save him. He had needed someone to remind him that his life was worth fighting for. And that lesson stayed with Elvis. Long after the hospital, long after the letter, long after the boy returned home. Because fame had given Elvis almost everything. Money, success, millions of fans, sold-out arenas, a name known around the world. But none of those things mattered in that hospital room. There were no flashing cameras there, no screaming crowds, no stage lights, no applause, just a frightened child, and a man who decided to show up. Years later, the boy would remember that night. Not because Elvis was famous, but because Elvis had treated him like he mattered. He remembered the chair beside the bed, the sound of Elvis's voice, the way he held his hand, the way he listened, and most importantly, the way Elvis never treated him like a dying child. He treated him like someone who still had a future, someone who could dream, someone who could fight, someone who could wake up tomorrow and become something new. And perhaps that was the greatest gift Elvis ever gave him. Not an autograph, not a photograph, not money, not fame, hope. Because sometimes you can't change someone's circumstances. You can't erase their pain. You can't promise them that everything will be perfect. But you can sit beside them. You can listen. You can hold their hand. And you can tell them, you're not alone. The boy's letter had started with a simple request. Elvis, if you ever have the time, please come see me. He probably expected nothing. Maybe he expected the letter to disappear. Maybe he thought Elvis would never even read it. But Elvis didn't answer that letter with another letter. He answered it with his presence. He got into a car. He went to a hospital. He walked down a quiet corridor. And he opened a door. For one little boy. That door became a doorway back toward hope. And there is something almost poetic about the ending. Millions of people dreamed of seeing Elvis Presley. They wanted front row seats. They wanted to hear him sing. They wanted his autograph. They wanted to stand beneath the lights while thousands of voices screamed his name. But on that night, Elvis didn't need a stage. He didn't need an audience. He didn't need applause. He only needed one chair beside one hospital bed. Because the most important performance of his life wasn't performed beneath thousands of lights. It happened in a quiet room, where one frightened child needed someone to believe in him. And Elvis did. The boy once asked, "If I get better, will you come back?" Elvis couldn't promise exactly when, but he gave him something more powerful than a promise. He gave him a reason to believe there would be another day. And perhaps that was why the boy kept fighting. Not because Elvis was a superhero. Not because a celebrity had magically changed his life. But because, for one night, someone had looked at him and refused to see him as hopeless. Someone had seen the child behind the illness. Someone had reminded him that his story wasn't finished. Years could pass. The world could change. Elvis's songs could become memories. But that little boy would never forget the sound of that door opening. He would never forget the man standing there. And he would never forget those simple words. "Hey, little man." Because sometime the smallest moments become the biggest memories of our lives. And sometimes the person you think you're writing to is actually the person who ends up changing you. The boy wrote one final sentence in his letter. Elvis kept it. It was simple, but it said everything. You came to see me when I thought nobody would. And perhaps that was the true answer to the entire story. Elvis didn't save the boy by being Elvis. He helped him by being human. And the boy didn't change Elvis because he was famous. He changed him because he reminded Elvis of something fame can make people forget. One person can still matter. One voice can still matter. One visit can still matter. One act of kindness can still matter. And sometimes, one letter can change two lives. Millions of people watched Elvis Presley perform. But only one little boy got to see the man behind the legend. And perhaps that is why, years later, the boy remembered that night not as the night Elvis Presley visited a hospital, but as the night someone came when he was afraid. Someone stayed when he could have left. And someone gave him a reason to believe in tomorrow. Because sometimes the greatest thing a human being can give another human being isn't a miracle. It isn't money. It isn't fame. It's simply this: I'm here. And on that night, Elvis was.